Welcome everyone. My name is Kabelo Malati. I am part of the Discursive Justice Ensemble with Lantian Shi and Michelle Wong. Thank you for joining us to the second episode that's taking place in Johannesburg. And just to say that the sounds that you're hearing are, one, there's a church across the road. So apparently every Thursday they have a church service. So what you're hearing in the background is the ongoing church service. And the call to prayer was a sound from Pallavi Paul's collection of sounds. And today in the walkthrough, we have Refile Namisa, who's part of our team in Joburg. And we have protagonists that are part of the Zoom call. And it's Pallavi Paul, Sunday Leilong, George Mahashe, Asako Iwama, Yoi Kawasuki, and Sisi Wang.
I guess I can pick it up from there. Sorry, I'm also in the back end trying to see to some technical issues that are coming up on the stream. So yes, following on what Kabelo was saying, so this ensemble, if you will, that Kabelo, Michelle, and I have formed, have been engaged in an ongoing deliberation for the past year or so, drawing from insights from seeing what is happening all around us, from the world in which we see songs for equality asserted everywhere, songs that conjure intangible courts of poetic appeals, songs of argumentation through myths, stories, and care, songs that are not daunted by the law, knowing that law is but one dialect, songs aware that law can sanitize, hearing only its own voice, rendering all else as noise. But justice is a different language, one with which to break down the world and put it back together again. See what worms are chomping at its rinds, to challenge prevalent advantage with new ways of inhabiting the world. So Kabelo, Michelle, and I formulate deliberations on discursive justice as a transcontinental tributary of varying style and duration, unfolding as quiet and intense occupations of time, with particular attention to enigmas, possessions, and obstinate silences. And we call in the carnivalesque, masquerade. We draw in the Middle Earth of healers and shamans. We play with technologies of renewal and admittance. We work with appeal, apology, gratitude, and indebtedness. We practice the art of counter-monuments, and we pose the discursive as a site of stakes and wagers, codes and limits. We think episódos as devices to weigh moments when justice becomes discursive, to make them matter to our thoughts. We design them to merge the boundary between the curatorial and the artistic, and as a way of intimating an engagement that we hope will shape the coming decade. And as ways to enter this deliberation, we propose a chase that is ongoing, a party that is forthcoming, and for today, scenography.
I think I'll pick it up from here. The scenography that you're looking at is the backyard of a house. No, actually, it's the front door of a house. We'll move to the backyard in a bit. Of a house where actually the metaphor that draws us there is that of a heron. Some of you who would see Lantian's screen right now actually has a heron there. Why the heron is interesting to us as an ensemble is that, a heron is a bird that fish. And in that sort of moment when a bird hunts, that's the moment of a relationship of a victim and a perpetrator. And the heron fish in a very sort of interesting way, where it draws its wings as an umbrella to cover the surface of water so that the fish actually then swims to it. And then when the heron then hunts. So what fascinates us is actually then this moment of waiting, of the drawing of the umbrella, and before the bird hunts, and the fish and the bird and all of us wait. And so this is sort of the scenography that we are entering into. And should we go in?
We're in the front porch section of this space now.
And when Cabello, Lantian, and I, we sort of talk and sort of deliberate on justice, a lot of the time we also think about these sort of moments when justice becomes discursive, or when sort of these discourse exceeds our sort of capacity of understanding as human beings. So we also look at plans, we look at different metaphors. And one of the plants that we've always sort of been fascinated by are lightning plants, butterfly palms, money plants. And I think there are many stories around these plants. The lightning plant in India is planted to sort of attract or protect a household from lightning. They are also known as the mother-in-law's tongue. And there are also these plants that are planted to create air or to produce air.
I think, you know, for me, it was also something about this idea of the companion plants. And I don't know if this was the case for you and Cabello, Michelle, but I took it as a kind of light metaphor for the three of us working in an ensemble, that somehow there are, you know, they're acting differently on the air, have differing utterances and temperaments, some kind of metaphor for ensemble work.
And I mean, also these plants are widely known as plants that purify the air. And interestingly, there's an air factory in Delhi which has these plants, and it's based on a NASA report of, I think it's 1989, which in a closed system, they looked at the potential of these plants to purify the air. But I guess growers and gardeners all over the world looked at this report and saw it as something that could be, I guess, replicated in households. So they've been kind of like throughout the world, people buy them hoping that they will clean their air of pollution and pollutants. But actually nobody's actually thought about closed systems and what it is to think about things that are not always within these kind of closed parameters, which, yeah.
So I think on the screen, would it be possible for us to zoom in for those of us who are lay people to understand which one is the snake or the mother-in-law's tongue, and which one is the butterfly? If you could point them out to us.
So the one that has like long, that long one that Rufilo is pointing at, that's the mother-in-law's tongue, the protector from lightning, the air purifier, and also a resilient plant. So it's very easy to keep. And the one next to it is the butterfly palm, which is a tropical plant that also, again, like is used as a decorative plant all over the world. And the money plant is one that, like, I heard a story recently that the money plant doesn't give you money, but if you keep it or it grows, it means the money that you already have doesn't get lost. So you don't lose the money that you have. So it doesn't change your poverty levels, but just keeps them. So that's the story I heard of the money plant.
I think also, apart from the church service, you hear from the neighbors now. The other neighbor next across the wall from the house is the artist Nicholas Clovo. And we had a visit, Cabela and I had a visit with Nicholas. And it was from Nicholas that we first heard of the story of the heron, which perhaps can come up later. But the heron had come into Nicholas's garden, and so there was some this kind of growing work came in quite early, thinking about tending to creatures who are discursively somehow engaged with one another and occupying the space together.
I feel like, can you go inside? I think now I can't with the service.
Can we stop here? This is a good sideline, I think. If we can stay here for a moment. So another thing that happens is, as we walk through, you will notice that the scenography sort of funnels or bottlenecks through the house. So it appears as though you enter through, through the front gate and a front yard and a front door, a front fence and then a front door. But then actually this kind of middle passage funnels the scenography through the house, so that this house does not become a kind of a destination kind of play. And in the hallway now, I don't know if you can hear, you will do as we spend time in it, you will start to hear sounds coming through the doors on either side, and the doors remain closed.
Do you guys know whose house is this?
So the house used to belong to a man who I've heard through stories as Mr. King. And so in some sense, it stayed the way that he used to live in it, in the sense of the gates and kind of like the security and the plants in the front garden. I mean, those that were on the stream early enough saw the plum tree. Maybe towards the end, we'll show you also like other plants like cacti, invasive cacti. And yeah, so that is that's all I know actually, is that Mr. King lived here. I mean, Rufila was saying that there have been people who came to visit the scenography wanting to see Mr. King, saying that they, I guess, haven't seen him in a while, and he has a shop at the back, and they used to shop here and things like that. So, yeah.
You can hear now the call to prayer happening through one of the rooms. And this is one of many sounds which we draw from Pallavi's work, who is with us in the Zoom as well. And I think for me, what it's doing in this hallway is also to obfuscate the spatial, or to desanitize the indexical. Also, this thing of the neighbor that we talked about earlier, especially in relation to housing delivery systems like this, and these kinds of like split unit architectures. And there's also, I don't know if you've seen this kind of spooky physics of Scooby-Doo doors. If anyone's seen Scooby-Doo, the cartoon, there's this kind of trope of the static shot down a hallway lined with doors that's used in chase sequences often. So typically it goes like characters chase each other into one door and then emerge from a different door. And there are variations of the gag. Characters being chased start doing the chasing, or characters appear more than once in the same frame, or all the characters chasing each other collide into a pile in the center, or a character will suddenly be seen riding a motorbike or something.
I think it also, kind of linking the plants and these sounds, I think it also produces a kind of habitation. Now that I'm seeing it from afar, and a habitation which is not really bound by, again, a kind of indexical spatial form, but something that's actually spread across. So, these sounds themselves were also sort of these propositions, of inhabiting a tempestuous contemporary, but collectively, not just in a fragmented sense. So to me, it's also about life and the challenge that it poses to maybe location as well.
Yeah, there's something.
Huh.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Go ahead. No? Okay. No, I was thinking, we call the scenography one of suspended time, and there are many ways of suspending the time here, whether the heron waiting or the fish waiting, and like Pallavi was saying, sort of this temporal, sort of your inhabitation of a space being sort of suspended by what you hear. And so at one point you hear more than one thing. And then there's this sort of in between time and in between space then that you get to inhabit more than one, and you seem to be traveling from one to another, and that also is a very interesting suspension. And I was wondering if we can turn to the door on the right, because we were talking about the suspension of time. And suspension can be in large scale, it can be very of human scale, and sometimes it might also just be of micro scale. I don't know what you think you see when you see this image. Is it an ocean? Is it a universe? Is it microorganism? Is it crystals?
Little bit of everything.
Huh.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about this idea of suspension, but also the bleeding of sound is something that this house is. It's very, like, in that sense, like, you constantly hear the outside when you're inside, and so there's always like the street is within, in a sense. You don't have to be very far. So the interesting thing as well, I think, with Pallavi's sound is this hearing of other spaces in a different space.
Can we go closer?
it's somewhere between a tranquil and tempestuous, right? There's this permeability almost of forms and surfaces.
What we were thinking with Hisham Berada's work was an idea of a larger world or the universe, but also kind of a stretching of the spatial. So where on the one hand, the house is very domestic and everything that you kind of get a sense of is very close. We wanted to expand that out as well, even though this this constellation was done in a very like in a jar. So Hesham, when he does these performances, he drops different chemicals in a jar that creates this explosion, if you will. So with this work, that's kind of like what we were trying to do within the scenography.
Whose work is this again? Sorry.
It's Hisham
Hisham
Berada's
Berada.
work.
Is this person here today?
Hisham was gonna come, but then he couldn't make it last minute.
He couldn't.
Yesterday when we were walking around, Rafila, who I believe is holding the camera, called this the snow globe room, which I was thinking about this morning, because later on in the scenography we will see in fact another little snow globe, and so there are these combinatory moments that happen in which things shapeshift around, take on different forms, leapfrogging from letters to deaths to images and so forth. And the other thing that I was reminded of is I don't know if folks know this this thing called the Tommy Westphal theory of the interconnected multiverse. So there was this television series in the 80s called Saint Elsewhere, and quite a long-running show. And in the last episode, the series ends with the camera zooming in on a snow globe that this side character, this autistic child, has been playing with throughout the series. And in the snow globe, which is the last frame of the series, you see the hospital that the entire show takes place in. So it goes that across the run of the show, there had been a number of crossovers and cameos with characters from other TV shows and films. So the theory is that all of these other worlds and the worlds they themselves overlap must all have been inside that snow globe, worlds within worlds, kind of like recursive nesting. And I think also, if I may throw one more anecdote, one of the things that we had started with in our deliberations was to look at these different kind of spans that are, let's say, that span wider than the knowable. And one thing that we spoke about was the Carneal Pluvial episode. Of course, thinking also about the making of episodes. And this was a period, I think, in the late Triassic, during which there was continuous rainfall for 2 million years across the entirety of the Earth's surface. So how to comprehend that kind of a span?
Refile, can we move to the next space?
Just a little observation here about connecting it to what all of you have been saying about this work. The sediment actually here is also so fascinating because it's not just it's not just an after sort of a remain. It doesn't just remain; it forms into something else. So it's also a dynamic kind of formation, and not just something that not like a wasteland that remains, but actually a world that forms.
Yes.
Wait, how big is the actual what's being projected? The actual thing, like, is it like a small tank? Is it like how big are the crystals actually that are being made? Does anybody know?
When we
It's
saw
tiny.
Hisham in doing this in Yokohama, he was like the world was the size of a jam jar. And the little things came from smaller jars. So
Because that's quite interesting that here it's projected so big that you feel like you're as small, or not as small as the organism or the things forming, but yeah. Anyway, I will.
Really cute. We have a real audience there. So there is an audience sitting, right? He's sitting. That's a
Yeah, that's a friend, Neo.
Yeah.
oh
No, it's beautiful.
yeah.
It felt like Plato's cave allegory of the cave. Like, this is the world that we are seeing in front of ourselves, and and when we move out of the cave, it's like the actual world, not of the ideas, but just in the but it feels like here is the reverse, because we're seeing it in the virtual version, and he's seeing the real actual world. And then I arrived to think that, well, actually, who is Plato to say that world is not real and the outside of the cave is the real world, kind of thing.
This kind of screen within screen recursivity we will also start to see later on when we get to CC and Sunday as well.
Oh, cool.
First, I thought that was like there's a garden, and somehow sunlight coming from this side. It's totally misunderstood. But that's kind of, I connected that what is the beginning entrance and coming into the hallway, and so somehow I didn't relate it to there's project and projection. So it's quite interesting. All that coming, as Lantern said, maybe like this layers of flat screen images, and it's quite, it's interesting. And the people, there's an audience there that is also a bit more like kind of confused, that in a way. So that's very beautiful.
I have a question. Does the neighbors come to see the show?
Yeah, Mr. King's neighbors have come, mainly to see Mr. Kim, who they didn't find, and they found the scenography. And we have the artist neighbor who we got the story of the heron from, has brought people around as well. So I've also heard a story that he was pushy. Also, the cat, who's the protagonist also, comes by. Not often, but cats usually have their own brains. Yeah.
One thing when we deliberate on discursive justice that we also touch upon is, when do things become legal and illegal? the moments in Hong Kong are one when your bodies are out on the street on some sort of different occasions, then it's illegal, and like you're doing something legal, then you're also sometimes doing something illegal. And I want to bring us over to the bike, which for us is also a metaphor for this horizon of legality and illegality. Also related to sound. Maybe I'll talk about the sound in Yokohama and Tokyo first. Is that there are these bike tuners in Japan where then they tinker with their bikes to make these really, really loud noise, then almost become an instrument that they can play. But it's actually illegal to do so. So there are moments when Lee, maybe you can go on. I always fail to tell this story in the most succinct manner. Is that if you make the bike sounds, at times they are illegal, but if you just make those sounds as bike tuning, as bike sounds, they are illegal. But if you use these bike sounds to play a song, then it might be legal.
Yeah, no, I think you have it. And of course, as you know, there's no way that I would be more succinct than you. But I think I think the in this case, it's noise as a legal distinction, but also as a political distinction, right? And so, I think part of our conversation has been to think engine sound as music, to think engine sound as engine speech, also to decouple speech from language, so-called language, but also I think the bike here, these bikes are technically not built to be street legal, right? So the bike, the presence of the bike itself, I think it invokes this kind of blurry legal horizon. And another thing that was pointed out yesterday when we were just us four walking, is that something happens that folks who come to visit want to see Pallavi's sound and hear the bike. And so there is this kind of, wanting to optically verify the source of amplification, of the source of output, and then wanting to acoustically verify the speech of the engine, which I found quite interesting as well. But I think also, dirt bikes somehow have this kind of prioritizing a function over comfort, and there's this kind of evocation of the tactical, circus, games, play, jumps, leaps, acrobatics, and also heist.
And also illegal on freeways. So in South Africa, dirt bikes or motocross and bikes are usually used for play and can only move within particular roads that are not. So you won't see them on normal roads, on freeways. And so there's also an association on who kind of gets to play, right?
Yeah, so, sorry, someone was about to say something.
No, continue. I'll say after.
I was just going to point out, from the previous view down the hallway, the tail of the bike kind of pokes in, and there's something quite mischievous about the way that it pokes in through the door frame into the hallway. And then once you get this turn, you get this sideline into the snow globe cosmos, as well as this bike, which is pointing toward, if you can see the sideline going through, this is the kitchen room. You see the bike pointing towards towards Sisi, towards a pile of copper in the background there. And you see it also pointing out the door into the backyard. George.
I mean, I was gonna pick up on, because now as we are starting to go to the outside, the church sound comes back in. And when I think about this idea of the sound, I'm reminded of a story. We've just been, when we started, we could hear the church. And one of the things that was interesting for me was that while there during the installation, I could also hear the mosque. Now I live on the other side of town. And before I live where I live now, I used to live next to a mosque. And it was a white area, and the mosque was not allowed to do the, to broadcast with a loudspeaker. So for me, it's interesting that which communities would let such things happen or would be open to such things happening, and which communities wouldn't let it happen. So for me, I think that's something that this conversation around sound, how is it legal for what sound to be, is quite an interesting thing to think about, especially in the context of Joburg. You've got areas where there's a whole lot of migrants where these things will not be an issue. And then you get areas in Joburg where these things are by law regulated, or I mean, there is bylaw regulation everywhere, but in some areas the bylaws are enforced, whereas in other areas the bylaws are not enforced. So that's something that I think is also interesting to think about in relation to this particular project, particularly because there's also another call to prayer within the sound at the beginning. That sometimes for me would be interesting to think whether people on the streets would sometimes mistake the call to prayer coming from the exhibit, from the scenography, as the call to prayer that's coming from the mosque down the street. So that's interesting for me.
Philo, can you walk in to the kitchen?
Familiar, Cici?
It looks really intimate. It's my first time to have this walkthrough as well. I like it. Wow, all of a sudden, yeah, it's kind of, yeah, this is a shot of the border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. It's kind of interesting to have this image in the house. So in this neighborhood, are there a lot of Chinese migrant workers, or maybe not migrant workers, that's not the right word. I guess the businessmen, immigrants.
I mean, the community that that lives here now has changed in the last year drastically, and it's a very it's different immigrants, African immigrants, so also Muslim immigrants as well, and then you have a kind of poor white community that lives around, and then you have I guess South Africans. So it's very mixed, and in relation to sound, as George picked up, there's...
Abello, we lost your camera feed. It's back.
That's back. Oof.
So this neighborhood in relation to tolerance of sound is very interesting. In that, like, you can hear the church, you can hear the mosque. I think we also saw a motocross actually on the street. So there is what maybe isn't particularly illegal as such, but there is a lot of crossing and that I didn't even think would be possible. So there's a lot going on the streets and in the neighborhood. That's I mean, definitely in the times that we live in, tolerance is very low. So it's, I think in that sense, it's very interesting.
Speaking of crossing, I think it's quite serendipitous that the shot that came up from CC's film is that of the border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And the story in CC's film is actually a real event, right? Of this young boy at the time from 20 years ago by the name of Yuman Han, who actually Sunday used to know, right? Because you guys were neighbors.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Who, you know, was a mentally challenged young person at the time, who then sort of ran away or sort of got lost and found himself crossing the border from Hong Kong to Shenzhen and disappearing. And to this date, still not found. So it's sort of unclear what happened to him. And that's in some ways, you know, why CC's film is called The Unfinished Return. Because this return is to somewhere, to nowhere. And it's not just this young man's return, but it's also the family's sort of unending search of this person. And I guess for some of us who, you know, have called Hong Kong home for many years, it's also a very strange moment, because this moment from 20 years ago was one of the moments that revealed what could happen when two places have different law systems and have no ways of communicating between these systems. And actually, this film first screened in 2019, before it all started again. And so I think, you know, to sort of have this different staging of a story that seems to have hauntings now, even back to sort of our casting of the protagonist from CC to Sunday. We didn't know Sunday knew Yuman Han until actually we have finished the staging of the scenography.
Oh.
Such a coincidence. I still want to learn more of the stories from Sunday, of your memory of Manhan, because I actually met his mother several times during the time that I was preparing for the production. And I'm really grateful to Manhan's mother of guiding, also, kind of having this support from her.
Human home mother is also my mother friend. And I still remember I feel shocking because I remember should be the Christmas time period. He get loose. And when I danced there from my home, I saw the notice that it's like they have a young guy loose. And then I asked my mom when I back home, and then she told me that it's just our neighborhood, because our window is very close to each other. And at that period, I always listen like a little bit crazy noise from his family. I think it's already take a very long time to let them little bit settle it. And because when I was very small, I have a memory, I say hello to that boys because they have a brother like this.
Yeah, he has
Yeah.
another.
And
Yeah.
yeah, that's a very sad story
Hmm.
to us. And yeah,
Yeah, I guess the story means a lot to the context and to the people in Hong Kong. And somehow I don't know if the case is as known in mainland. I mean, in comparison with how people received it or how much well received in Hong Kong. Yeah, and that was in 2000, so it's kind of 3 years after the handover, which was in 1997. And that was kind of the first case triggered or revealed the gap in the law, in the legal system, in the legal justice system, um, in both sides, including Hong Kong and mainland. And so historically, the case itself has a metaphysical space already, because it is, I mean, historically, it is a really sad event. But also for me, when I approached this case, it is not only stayed on the historical level, but it also became a metaphor of who he was or who he could be. So there are multiple layers for me when I was thinking of Manhan, since he was disabled mentally and also autistic. So he couldn't really speak who he was, and his memory of himself was not completed. He didn't know where his home was, where his mother was, and what his name was when he was lost. So because of this multiple condition made him anonymous at that time, in terms of the police couldn't recognize him as a Hong Konger. He belongs to Hong Kong. And that's why when he was sent back to the Hong Kong side, the police made a really terrible mistake. They sent him back to Shenzhen, which is the other side, the mainland side. And that actually led him to disappear eventually. So I feel like his anonymity at that time opened several layers for imagination, or in terms of this, maybe from a realist state leading to this surrealist state. I mean, in my perspective. So his anonymity, or this anonymous state of his identity, actually opened up more possibilities for his identity. I mean, 19 years later, when I was actually working on it. So he is a metaphor for several things. Yeah.
I think for me, I guess for some of us, Yuman Han's story is a very, very sad story. But I also see a bit of him as, or that metaphor as that of a fugitive. That this was someone who ran away, like who escaped different systems, whether it is that of the law, that of physical appearance or existence. And that, there's a shot in the film where there's a cow lantern, where then, Manhan supposedly disappeared from a land bridge, but you find him, or maybe it's someone else, or a child actor who, never made another film after his breakout performance, on a ferry. And a cow lantern comes and sits with this character who seemed to just have escaped these systems of legalities, of sort of predictable steps. And I think that for us is also, I guess it points us somewhere else, other than the systems that we already know, the binaries that we sort of feel that we have to subscribe to and sort of identify with. And I think there is an opening up of that also allow us to become fugitive. And by becoming fugitive, rewrite the rules or rewrite the game entirely.
Yeah.
And I think with the fugitive comes the thief, or sort of dispute over sort of agreements over quantity or quality of stuff that's being traded. And can we look at the pile of shiny things, which until recently we were very, very scared of it being stolen because copper is worth a fortune.
And its status as like a high value metal stretches back to Babylonian time. And the first customer service complaint, which was translated by Leo Oppenheim, I will read it to you. When you came, you said to me as follows: when he comes, I will give Gimelson fine quality copper ingots. You left then, but you did not do what you promised me. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger citizen and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. What do you take me for? That you treat somebody like me with such contempt. I have sent as messengers gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money, deposited with you, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back to me empty-handed several times, and through enemy territory at that. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Talmon who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. On account of that one trifling mina of silver which I owe you, you feel free to speak in such a way, while I have given to the palace on your behalf 1,080 pounds of copper. And Umi Abam has likewise given 1,080 pounds of copper. Apart from what we both have written on a sealed tablet to be kept in the temple of Shamash. How you have treated me for that copper. You have withheld my money back from me in enemy territory, so it is now up to you to restore my money to me in full. Shall from now on select and take the ingots individually on my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection because you have treated me with contempt. End story.
So you see from this kind of 1,000-year...
And so I guess the copper has been on our minds. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the complaint I've just read is also linked to, in some ways, the lightning plant, which in South Africa, copper is a high value metal and it's stolen on electric poles. And often when people do steal it on electric poles, they do get electrified and it looks like lightning. So in some way, what Lee was saying, how we're thinking of things in these kind of shape-shifting. This was one moment where the lightning plant and copper kind of are connected.
Yeah, I was gonna pick that point up as well, actually. So there's also, you see in the move from the screen to the pile of material, there's also this kind of resolution play, pound to pixel kind of exchange rate, because the amount of copper that is identified in this 1,000-year-old debt, in this in this customer complaint note that Cabello read, is 1,080 pounds of copper, right? which also happens to be 1080p standard resolution. There is also in these screens that you see throughout the scenography this kind of 1080 consistency. Now here, what you're seeing is not the debt repaid, because the claim that we make is not that you come upon this pile of copper which settles the debt. This is half that amount of copper, and so the debt continues to be unpaid. But in this kind of shape-shifting resolution play, there's also this kind of conjuring of entanglements and perhaps some kind of like object impermanence discursivity. And also to invoke this kind of planetary circulation of matter, to render that span again, the 1,000-year span, also thinking here of Hisham. And, interestingly, Cabello, we had started talking about this tablet with George, and Cabello happened to be in London. So he said, can you go and take an image of this tablet? And I hope Cabello doesn't mind my saying, but in fact, she somehow ended up taking a picture of a different tablet. And so we like this kind of wrong destination, right? Or the wrong landing that we indulge in as a kind of detour to make a turn. I think Michelle earlier brought in this idea of the turn, which in fact reminds me of the approach to the old Hong Kong airport. There's this, the approach was via a turn, right? You don't kind of land in on a linear trajectory, but you have to pass through this landmass called Checkerboard Hill. And so it produces this kind of spin, which precedes the landing. And the other thing I'd like to point to is if you look at letters from Mesopotamia, what's also striking is that a large amount of recorded correspondence was around transaction of goods, claims, debts owed, disputes over handshake agreements. And always the language is just like wonderfully verbose, like until you come and repay me the debt you owe me, you must not even sit down or touch any water or food, this kind of language.
Another thing that, or rather something to put in for me, what's interesting about this copper here is also what you learn about copper in South Africa and most of Africa is that even though we have this copper, if you wanted to buy copper from South Africa today, you would not be able to, you would have to wait for 10 years because most of the copper from any mine is bought 10 years in advance, which for me also introduces a question of how do the local, the guy who sold the copper was saying that most of the copper goes to Sony and all the big tech companies. And for me, the question is, as copper, which is something that's quite used in a lot of sacred artifacts, how do people that have copper in their spaces who can't access it actually get to access it in the first place? So for me, it's also interesting when you think about how this is in fact copper that's been melted from copper that's been recycled, and it will keep getting melted, resold, melted, resold. But at the same time, when it's melted and resold, people still wanna steal it, because even in that economy of melting and reselling, most people are still excluded from it, because the capital that governs who gets to control it is also a bit murky for me. So I think for me, it's something that one must always think about in relation to, or not one must think about, but it's something that has become quite acute for me, whereas before it wasn't quite as strong.
Mm. We see also in this sightline the aesthetics of securitization, right? So we are in a residential architectural setting, but this area that you see was formerly a shop. And so I think you can see middle right in the frame what was the door to the shop, the green double doors. Yes, exactly. Thank you. And you see a plate as it's a sort of security device, no?
So that is Mr. King's alarm system. So he's put a plate so that if somebody opens the door, it will fall and make a sound, and he will be notified that there's an intruder in the space. And so it was a fitting space as well for us as a highly secured place for our copper. So, yeah.
Awesome.
But I mean, I think the other thing that we also talked about is the idea of thinking about justice as debt, you know, and always there's always a debt, a responsibility to pay debt, and this is this way, this complaint actually is. I guess everybody is trying to get what's due to them, right? In different forms, whether we're thinking, I mean, the justice system essentially is there to deal with these claims of who owes, what debt is owed, and such. Philip, can we?
Yui
Turn?
wants to say something.
One question that I had in mind when you were talking about the debt, how would you folks think about the Jubilee laws that were in Babylon that I think, I'm not really sure, I'm not much knowable about that, but a friend of mine, an artist friend of mine talked about how the tablets in Babylon were made of clay and not of stone, also because it's easier to make, but also because it's easier to break. And every 7 years in the Jubilee year is the year when all the prisoners are freed and all the debts are, how do you call, pardoned. And so then that year, all the debts that were between merchants, they were broken in the clay space, and then that debt was forgotten and forgiven, which I thought that is a very interesting concept. That 7 years is the maximum amount of time that you can be indebted to someone or to some state or some legal enforcement system or chain in a way.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that we've been really thinking about is thinking about different ways of dealing with, I guess, justice or debt. And because also, I think we all know that the current system that most of us use doesn't quite work. It has too many holes. And also it doesn't allow a lot of different voices and different ways of thinking around justice. And so, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
As we come out into the backyard now, you will see a sightline with a pond, a bathtub, makeshift pond, in which there are fish who are in fact also watching us on the live stream right now. And next to the fish, you see a laptop next to another snow globe, which we will take a look at later. And then the screen next to that is Sunday's video. But I think we wanted to spin around to the right-hand side before we land up there, no?
Let's look at the heron.
Yes. So you see here in another securitization tactic, which we have cut into this fenced wall center image, roughly the size of the wingspan of a heron. And so the thinking was, you know, how to make the scenography invitational to the arrival, to lean it towards the arrival of a heron. And I don't know if anyone mentioned earlier already, but this story that Nicholas, the artist neighbor, told us about how a heron would come to his garden, to his pond to fish for goldfish. But the pond was of such a depth that the heron had a hard time grasping onto the fish, and so kept scratching and maiming the fish, leaving both kind of tired and injured after the fact. And so Nicholas was speaking to us about his efforts to increase the depth of the pond so as to keep the fish farther away from the grasp of the heron. And so we started to think about what affordances might be made for a heron to make it easier to enter into this securitized environment. And through this fence, you see a chair on which is a rendering of this tablet that Cabello was reading from. And in terms of this kind of shape-shifting, also what comes to mind for me is that these combinatory groupings aren't seen ever at the same time, almost like kind of like a Clark Kent Superman situation. You don't catch the transformation. You don't catch the moves red-handed. The moves happen in a way that breaks sightlines. You know, the mother-in-law appears as a plant and then a pack of spice powder, or the copper becomes a tablet or a pile or a story. So there's a kind of difference engine, but its moves are out of view.
And that is the pack of mother-in-law spice, which is Durban's spice mix that's very hot. And we went to buy samosas and we were told about the the heat of mother-in-law spice essentially means that you can't taste anything. So it doesn't help your taste buds. It actually just nullifies them, I guess.
Also kind of looks like the color of copper.
Yeah, in fact, we had this discussion right during the period of looking into purchasing a large amount of copper. The forms that it takes, that it comes in. You can also get copper in there's granules. Is it? There's some
Granules, sheets, something.
Granules.
Exactly.
Granules, and they come in this particular size, which is a 1 kilogram. This is 1 kilogram of spice, you get 1 kilogram, I think 2 kilogram, 5 kilogram granules, and then you get bigger than that, tons. Yeah.
Actually, to Yoi's point of the smashability of the debt earlier, there's also something in terms of a kind of palm size. A lot of these tablets are rendered in a standardized palm size. So not only is the clay materially brittle, but its size is also shaped to be easily thrown. And there's somehow this kind of consistency with this kind of standardized packaging size for the packets of spice and also for copper.
So if I were a thief and I come into this house, apart from stealing the copper, what I might steal might be actually in the fish tank. Oh, I might also steal time, which is where Sunday is coming in, but maybe we can look at the fish first. So what you see here is the bathtub, and inside there is fish, and I think it's what do you call that? 鲢鱼, right? Which is also for those of us who are a little more familiar or closer to Chinese culture, is also a symbol for wealth, and it's important to keep them alive. And as you can see, sort of from the rest of the scenography, also that there is a lot of security measures inside this house. The fish is also not left alone from this. And maybe we can go and look for that little piece of paper that says, "Hey, you thugs." Yeah, please, really.
Hey, you thugs, steal whatever you want, but please leave the fish pump alone. It's for the fish. They need it more than we do.
This we left because, after all the intense securitization, locked doors, fences, more fences, electrical fences, finally at the end you have this like personal appeal.
And then we have well, because fish can actually see beyond their water surface. So we thought why not put a camera there so that we can see them and they can see us too.
Mhm.
And next to the fish tank, Lee, you want to go?
No, I was just going to say this spherical object at the edge of the pond, which Rafila just pointed to, is live streaming on Jitsi. There's a link, if you're so interested, you can find it on the Yokohama Triennale website. And I think for me, it's inflecting this kind of securitization that we've been talking about, but also the optic register kind of incident-driven logic of surveillance or of attention generally. And we had discussed this kind of genre on live streaming platforms of critter vision, critter cams, weather cams, zoo cams, and this kind of thing, and what it does for accompaniment. You'll also see on YouTube, for example, these ambient sound mixes or field recordings, rain falling on a tin roof, 24-hour video or continuous stream of lo-fi beats. And there are these very long homework mixes or sleep mixes this kind of haptic rolling of slightly varying focal length, in which these videos also become moments of assembly where communities form and gather to look at fish, for example. And also something about again, this kind of bank heist or the heist film, the camera trained on a particular view. And then someone carefully places an image of the same view just in front of the camera. So disappearing act of sorts in which disappearance enables or opens up a terrain that's away from view, but it's not occupied with optic verifiability. The other day, we were in a seminar, I suppose, with Ivana, who's one of the other artists in the Yokohama exhibitionary, who said that the disappearance is not an absence, right? So that's also something that I think echoed for us, reverberated for us.
And then next to the sort of snow globe after snow globe, whether it's in the form of a fish tank or a security camera or a laptop, you see the TV, which inside is Sundays, work called TV peeking, where Sunday goes around stealing other people's time from TVs and changing people's, channels of TVs in shopping malls without permission, with a universal remote control, which actually she offered to send us, and we really should have taken it.
Yeah, because we bought 3 universal remotes and 2 didn't work. So they were not that universal. So
Yeah, I think it's a little bit tricky to manual the remote control because I still collect some remote control, but it's not all working. I
think we can send you 2 universal remotes that don't work.
Yeah.
And what you see in these frames are really, again, frame within frames, and sometimes they're just like the oddest time ever. And like, what individual would be so inclined to sort of either put things into order by, switching on and off the TVs, or putting things into disorder by changing into other channels. And we found this sort of curious figure of not really a thief, but also a bit of a mischievous delinquent almost. And in places like Hong Kong, where you barely have space other than your own flat, and then you go into the mall, this is sort of a really ingenious attempt to sort of create more space for the mind and for the physical self, and also in time, which we thought rounds it up nicely for us.
I think it's I think it's also for me we're seeing a kind of a telepath magician who is also contorting and molding seams and cavities of a city, making these tiny revolts. You see that the television sets in the storefront, the property commodity is still locked away, but nothing's broken, right? There's theft, but nothing is broken. It's like in spy movies, the bank or vault or museum with the grid of lasers, and the thief has to undo gravity to navigate the grid, has to choreograph their way through or dance their way through. The grid is left unbroken. It anyway doesn't know how to register. Somehow like the formulation of the stenographer's dilemma that we've been talking about, that the index doesn't know how to register the dance. And also what I think is interesting is the figure appears as a kind of passerby, who returns the gaze to the screen. And there's some kind of spontaneous animation that happens, which we can see in Sunday's other works also. This kind of city magic.
Yeah.
And Amia, who is part of the Hong Kong ensemble, pointed out the other day this anecdote about Tuvalu in Polynesia, whose largest export is its registered top-level internet domain, .tv, which accounts for 10% of the island's annual GDP. So there's this kind of reverting the gaze of the screen that I find quite interesting here. And also, if you think about the combinatory between Sunday's stealing of time and Cece's disappearance of a young boy, and then finally we come to the heron, which hunts by drawing the shape of an umbrella over the water. We have this kind of melodic lean to the events of Hong Kong that we see between the drawing of an umbrella and the stealing of time and the disappearance of the young boy.
I also just want to chime in a little bit about, I also kind of get inspired by Sunday's piece. I mean, the word stealing, I mean, by theory, it sounds a little bit negative. It's almost like looting, looting time. But then, I mean, when we were talking about justice and that is a concept emerged out of capitalistic society. And I think within this context of capitalism of today, especially in Hong Kong, we are looted almost every day by not knowing what we are being taken away. And I think it's really interesting that Michelle also used this word thief and stealing, because we are actually taking back things that maybe it should belong to us anyways. And I think it's not like, I don't think the word stealing or thief is a negative word here. It's almost like we are taking something back, like something that's originally belonged to us anyways. Yeah, it actually makes me also think about the notion of the trickster in many kind of stories as well. It's usually either a heron or a fox, and it is a kind of, I guess, if you see it in the binary logic that Cece you've kind of highlighted as well within the word thief, is that the trickster is stealing or maybe borrowing, but in the stories that at least I heard as a kid, this was narrated to kids as a role that was interesting, like a kind of a space in between, a way of seeing the world, a way of kind of like even shifting things to your side. So the trickster, I mean, like one story is a rabbit that goes to a lioness who has 5 cubs and says to the lioness, "I'll look after your cubs. Don't worry, you go hunting, I'll look after the cubs." And then the rabbit, first day at work, gets hungry and the lioness is not coming back, kills 1 cub, cooks the cub, eats the cub. Lioness comes back from hunting, is like, "Where are my cubs?" It's like, "No, don't worry, they're all here." Picks up 4 cubs. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, picks the 4th cub and counts that twice. And then lioness is happy. And then this happens until there's literally no cubs. And the rabbit has to run for its life and comes up with a story of a robbery. That, I have been looking after the cubs and this big animal came and took the cubs away. And I mean, I'm also just like, I'm shocked that I survived this ordeal.
you know? So it's this is a story that is told in a way to kind of like give you a way out in a sense, or to like give you a third way of thinking outside of the binary. And I mean, there are many stories of like, I guess the fox and the rabbit are these kind of like mischievous animals that one thinks about.
I wonder if it's a cautionary text or like a map on how to do it right. Like these tricks. Which is...
That's a prompt to further deliberation over drinks, I think. And
yes,
I'm really quite captivated by this sightline. I'm, you know, also one thing that comes in and out is the sound of the pond, which then again, this overhearing of what brings us back to when you first heard Pallavi's sound. And then now we're sort of overhearing other sounds of the pond and all that. But we've actually stolen a lot of extra time from what we planned, I realized. And I think this is a great prompt for us to sort of wrap this up and move this over to the blue carpet for those of us who would like to join us. And yeah, any last words? If not, when we started, Sunday already had her Asahi out. So I think we should promptly move over.
I have another curious question when I look back this work always. It's like nowadays the technology is very high tech. I still can't know why they still use very old fashioned red ultralight to connect the TV, and even though how new of the model, you know. So I try to find the gap, like very safe or security, and the difference between, I don't know how to say, is just recently in Hong Kong, because I find it's very difficult for me to do this kind of the work in Hong Kong right now. But yeah, just see. Yeah.
Okay. Someone needs to make an executive decision and end this.
Yeah, I think the call to prayer is tuning us back and telling us it's time.
Cool. All right. See you guys on the blue carpet.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you to the YouTube
Thank you.
folks watching on YouTube also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. The 31 people who stayed till the end. Okay, bye.
Okay, I'm gonna end the stream, but the Zoom will be still on if I can figure out